Today down in the comments, I want to hear your favorite Lucio Fulci film. And if you've never seen any Lucio Fulci films, the comments section is going to be a great guide to getting started, especially because he is a director and has worked in a number of different subgenres. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take a new or a reissue horror movie and then pair it with a horror book recommendation that you will enjoy if you like that movie. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more movie and book pairings like this one. This week's question was about Lucio Fulci, and no surprise, we're going to be talking about two Lucio Fulci films, putting these kind of in their context of his career. But these are the brand new Blue Underground 4K Ultra HD editions. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about whether it's worth upgrading these if you have the previous releases that were not all that long ago. So a couple years ago now, I did a video running down Blue Underground's first of these 4K restoration releases. These were not Ultra HD 4K discs. These were just regular Blu-ray, and they were 3-disc limited editions. They had these lenticular covers. The other one I talked about was Maniac, William Lustig's Maniac. William Lustig is the owner-operator of Blue Underground as a label. Just a general film fan and kind of 42nd Street archivist. And when I talked about these, if you can go back and watch those movies, when I talked about these, I kind of remarked how incredible, especially Zombie, looked like a different movie than the movie I remembered seeing on DVD in middle school or high school, whenever it was, whenever I first saw this film. Even in the comments of that video, I had a lot of people like, "Oh, these movies are, you know, grindhouse, crummy movies that if you're British, especially, you first saw on like multi-dupe copies of bootleg VHSs that actually had all the gore intact, since they were cutting these movies to ribbons in the UK and to a certain extent in the United States." So I had a lot of pushback on the idea that these movies should be pretty, should look good. But they're beautiful, professionally made. The cinematography on these was meant to hold up to the scrutiny of a packed movie house. And I kind of argued that they should look better. Fast forward a few years, and we're looking at a new format, an entirely new format, which I would not have the ability to play if it weren't for the new, not the new, but the Xbox One X, which comes with the ability to play these 4K Ultra HD movies. Yeah, so just for reference, here is look at that, the case is like beat to hell. These two films were produced very shortly, same producers, same production company. Fulci had a good relationship with them, and he made Gates of Hell, The Beyond, then House by the Cemetery, then The New York Ripper. I think that's the chronology there. I just looked it up and literally may have forgotten and gotten it wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I think that's right. So these are kind of middle period Fulci films, and are worth looking at just because how different they are. They feel like incredibly different films. They feel, at least to me, like a different filmmaker. And putting them right next to each other and being like, oh no, these movies came out right next to each other, had many of the same people behind the scenes creatively involved. But it's just very interesting to me. House by the Cemetery is very quickly about a family. The father is doing academic research, is following up on one of his colleagues who died. He's following up on his research and looking into what he can salvage of the man's research. And he moves his family from Manhattan, from New York, to the Boston suburbs. He moves them to Massachusetts. He moves them into this house that has a history, that has some kind of dark past. And then it is, for a good amount of it, it is a pretty basic haunted house story. But the moments of Fulci really indulging his by now what had become his trademark gore and his trademark violence and his trademark nihilism really elevate this from your typical haunted house movie into the realm of it feels in some ways, I guess maybe in my mind when I originally saw this movie, I kind of marked it down as the tamer Lucio Fulci, but it's really not. It's really what stuck with me on this viewing is how brutal this movie is and how nihilistic this movie is towards characters who really kind of, in a lot of senses, don't deserve the fates that they're given. You can tell it was produced pretty soon after The Beyond because he's kind of still in that mode, of like the uncanny and the arcane and the supernatural not quite being just like, oh, ghosts, like our traditional Victorian ghosts, but ghosts that are almost closer to something Lovecraftian, closer to something cosmic horror, a haunting being more than just restless spirits, a haunting being something a little bit more esoteric and a little bit more arcane. And I love that about this movie. This is very much an Italian horror movie. Most of the actors were Italian actors brought over to Massachusetts to shoot. They shot this in Concord and a couple shots in Situate, Massachusetts. And then they did the rest on sound stages in Rome. And the actors were all dubbed over with American voice actors. Sometimes, in the case of the little boy, like egregiously and kind of famously miscast. And it has that very Euro feel to it. But on the other hand, he gets such great use out of Concord, and even if it's like maybe it's like a third of the movie is exteriors, probably. Even if it is only like a third of the movie, that you get a couple shots in New York and then you can get a bunch of scenes in Massachusetts. Really, a little goes a long way to make this feel New England and make this feel like early 80s Massachusetts. And it's such a great film. The reveal of like it's a ghost, but it's also a monster. Like the reveal of the final kind of monster, this Dr. Freudstein that the family is hearing about and the father is investigating, and everyone knows something is wrong with the house and people are going missing, and there's maids and there's people helping out and they're losing their heads and they're getting ripped up. The reveal of the curse of this house is very shocking, and then the ending, I something about it this time. Either I didn't remember it all the way from whatever the Anchor Bay release of this movie was. Something about it really stuck with me and really worked for me. So, House by the Cemetery, more brutal than I remember it, but still really, really good. Even though a lot of the special features are holdovers from that last disc, or from even the disc before it, even the 2011 disc, they are well worth watching. My favorite one of the holdover features is a discussion with the two child actors who are now grown, and their recollections of Fulci really sound like adults. When adults talk about Fulci on these special features, they talk about how difficult he was and how like they have like this weird deep respect for him, maybe because he's either passed away or because he is kind of this legendary figure in Italian cinema. But it sounds like at the time they were having a really bad time. And these kids who are now grown do talk about how, oh, well, he made me cry a couple of times, or, oh, he seemed angry a lot of the time. I kind of like that. I kind of like seeing Fulci through a child's eyes, and him just being just as gruff and just as difficult a person as he seemed to be in every other aspect of his life. Troy Howarth does the audio commentary, and there's a lot of it just feels really dense. You watch it, I kind of had it on the background while I was doing other things, and he's just talking about, he knows every little piece of minutia about what actors worked with Fulci before, who worked it where, how this fits into kind of the timeline of Fulci's oeuvre. Really great stuff. And then if you kind of want the more condensed version of that, the more on-camera version of that, there is the discussion with Stephen Thrower. If you watch any special features, these are familiar names and familiar faces because you've seen Stephen Thrower talk about a ton of stuff on all the Arrow discs. So the should I upgrade, should I not? As someone who had the 2011 one, yeah, I feel like it's worth the upgrade. If you have the 2019 one, which I do not have, which is less than a full year ago, you're probably not going to want to grab this unless you were an absolute diehard completist who needs to see this in the most pristine way possible. You have the same, I think it's the same restoration. It's the same 4K restoration of the last disc, but it's just now it's on the Ultra HD 4K, and it looks incredible. It looks way better than when I watched it in 2011 when I got the last disc. The next movie we're going to talk about is a little bit of a different story from The House by the Cemetery, which is a movie I have appreciated and enjoyed the entire time I've been a fan of Italian cinema. It was one of the first Lucio Fulci films I saw, one of the first I enjoyed. And then there is, shortly after House by the Cemetery, I'm pretty sure within a year of producing it, Lucio Fulci made a movie called The New York Ripper, which I think was also called The Ripper, which was also originally called its first script, the first version of it, which a number of different directors were attached to, I think, including Ruggero Deodato. At one point, I think it was called The Beauty Killer, which also gives you an idea of what kind of movie this is. This is a movie that, when it initially came out, I don't think I had the DVD. I think the way that I first saw it was that it was back when Netflix sent discs out in the mail. I know they still do, but it's not the main thing. It's like a different service now. But the height of kind of Netflix, ordering movies from Netflix and getting your discs and sending them back and watching them, I had rented The New York Ripper because I wasn't sure that the movie was gonna be for me. And I think we're still talking high school at this point. And I remember watching it and just being so turned off by it. And it is such a brutal and mean movie. And Stephen Thrower talks about this in his newly shot appreciation of the film. It's like a 20 or 30 minute discussion of it. But he brings up this idea that The New York Ripper was done at such a time that there was a kind of one-upsmanship happening with the Italian directors, the Italian splatter guys. It was almost like kind of an arms race in a sense. And I think New York Ripper is Lucio Fulci winning that arms race pretty handily, to the extent that this movie barely got a release in the United States, didn't get released at all in Britain. The New York Ripper kind of says what it is in the title. This is shot like House by the Cemetery, kind of feels like a very New England movie. The New York Ripper, as Italian as it is, and it's super duper Italian, it is kind of the nexus between the American slasher and the Italian giallo. It feels very New York, and there is a lot of on-location shooting. They shoot all over. It's not just Midtown. It's not just kind of 42nd Street, even though there is a lot of great marquees and sights and sounds of 42nd Street, New York, where movies like this would play. There's all over, and there's a great scene in a subway that is kind of reminiscent of William Lustig's Maniac. It really gets good use out of New York, and when it does switch to interiors in Rome, it's even hard to tell because it gets that sweatiness, it gets that small, cramped feeling of New York, even in the kind of Rome shot studio stuff. And this was a movie that for the longest time I'd kind of marked down as, that's a miss for me. Like that's not a Fulci film that I enjoy. That one's too much for me. It's too out there. It's too gross. It feels seedy and overly mean and overly nihilistic and overly misogynistic, because it is about a Jack the Ripper type character terrorizing women in New York, and someone gets killed on the Staten Island ferry, and it's a gruesome, terrible sequence. They're kind of in their car trapped. But now, with a little bit, I don't know, maybe I've become more jaded, maybe I've become harder to shock, maybe I've become more adult in a certain way, or more detached, that I can be like, okay, not everything I have to treat on a purely emotional level. And this was the viewing that I turned the corner on the New York Ripper. And it still is all those things that made me not like it to begin with. But I think there's enough there for me, especially in the second half, where there's kill scene, kill scene, kill scene, kill scene. We go back and forth to the cops that are really kind of bad at their jobs and really kind of almost like comedic caricatures. Then things get even weirder, and there's a whole subplot about the possible killer and all the different suspects, and we have a million different red herrings of like, is the killer a woman, is the killer a man? Like, we have all these things happening, and then when the killer is finally revealed, it's not that it's the most satisfying like twist, whodunit twist in the world, but the audacity and the weirdness and the not only of the killer's like the way the killer operates. He or she puts on when they're talking to the police, and when they're kind of doing their kind of Dear Jack the Ripper back and forth with the police, they're talking in a Donald Duck accent. They're using the Donald Duck quack as like a way to scare their victims. There's more about this movie now that struck me as either comedic or either over the top to the point of ludicrousness and Fulci understanding that this is an excessive movie, where as a teenager maybe I didn't pick up on that element of it, where as a teen I think I was focusing on the gore effects and how realistic they look, and in 4K they still hold up. They don't really look overly plasticky in this transfer, but there is just, especially when you consider how the last 15 minutes of how things wrap up and how ridiculous things become, there is a certain knowingness that I didn't pick up on when I first got that sleeve from Netflix and was like, I don't like this one. I kind of marked it down as a movie I didn't like, and I really think this is they go to such lengths to talk to everyone who is involved in this picture, along with House by the Cemetery. It's just Blue Underground done such due diligence to place these films in their context, not only with the star interviews, but the getting these experts, these two guys that have written books about Fulci, and kind of they talk about, especially Thrower talks about Fulci like by his first name. He's like Lucio, and it's like, normally that would annoy me. Normally that would be like that would seem almost overly informal, but it's just clear that he's lived with this person's legacy and lived with this person's work for a really long time, and feels that comfortable that he can just call him Lucio. These are amazing sets. There's a lot here to recommend if you don't have the other versions. If you have the other versions, I'm not sure that these replace them. They may replace the 2011-2012 versions of them, but they don't replace last year's to a certain extent. But they're films that House by the Cemetery I knew I always liked, and I was able to reappreciate it, especially looking as clean as it is. I was able to really enjoy it. And then the New York Ripper is so pretty ugly, that it really worked for me this time in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. This week's book recommendation is different than we normally do. I've never talked about a book that's on Kickstarter before, but I guess I've never had reason to, because I've never been contributing to one. Or maybe that's not true. I might have contributed to a couple magazines or something that were on Kickstarter, but I didn't have the YouTube channel at this point. But this Kickstarter fits so exactly with the movies we're talking about this week that I had to mention it. This is Beyond the Book of Eban, edited by Perry Rowland and Astrid Rose, and it's being put out by Death Wound Publishing. And it's currently, I think it's like 14 days left as I'm recording this, so I'll put a link down in the description. It's currently kickstarting, and I'm not quite sure what the plans are for this book outside of Kickstarter. I can say that right now it's not one of those things where like, oh, am I gonna kickstart this and then it won't get made, or am I gonna kickstart this and it won't reach its goal? As of right now, it's not only reached its goal, but it's reached a couple of stretch goals. So it's going to have kind of be a more deluxe edition of this book. And Death Wound Publishing, they've put out books before, they've done their due diligence, they know how this process works. So you can kind of kickstart with confidence. I'm not a huge Kickstarter guy. I've used it before. I've used it for some things. I've used it for like board games and stuff like that. But I really think these people know what they're doing. The editors approached me, and they approached a number of other horror creatives and people that enjoy the films of Lucio Fulci, and they wanted to do a literary tribute to Fulci. And I think all the authors are taking different approaches to how they interpret the idea of. The book's title itself is a reference to the Beyond, but Fulci had zombie flesh eaters, one on top of the other, and lizard in a woman's skin, and the devil's honey, and conquest. He made a sword and sandal movie. The types of films he made are so varied, and there's so many different ways to kind of interpret his legacy and discuss it and use it as fodder for short stories that I think this is going to be a really special book, having not read a word of it other than my own story. I am in this book. I have written a story that is, I'm not going to really tell you what it's about because it'll be a surprise, but it is about something we talked about in this video. I don't do a lot of short story requests. I don't do a lot of short stories on spec, just because I'm very busy, and I'm under contract for 2 books right now. But I consider myself a novelist first and foremost. I enjoy writing short stories. I enjoy reading short stories, but I don't do it a whole lot. I don't like do the short story hustle game where I'm like writing a bunch of short stories and sending them out and seeing if I get magazine placements and stuff like that. So I don't really do that. But this was a project that I like the people involved, and I enjoy Fulci so much, and I felt like this is a good opportunity to write something that's very different than how I normally write. So I was like, yeah, sure, put my name in the hat. I would love to contribute to that, and I think it's going to be. I think a lot of the other contributors. There's my friends Matt Serafini and Oren Gray, and there's a lot of other great writers. And you can go over to I'll put the link in the description. You can go over to the Kickstarter and see the table of contents and see who's contributing fiction to this. But I think it's going to be really special, and I think they're doing so far from what I've seen in the email chains I'm in and stuff like that, and so far from what I've seen on the Kickstarter page, they really know what they're doing, and they're doing this properly. There's a whole bunch of different tiers of contribution, so I would go over there, consider it. Don't consider it like you're kickstarting it, because it's already funded, so the book's going to happen either way. But consider it like you're pre-ordering it. Go check it out, and if you like Fulci, go enjoy. Oh, and I forgot to mention the one of the big draws probably for a lot of people is that Trevor Henderson, the creator of Siren Head, so many different other internet cryptids. He did the cover, and it's really, really something special and something gross and grotesque, and I think Mr. Fulci would appreciate it. So go check it out. We love Italian horror cinema. We love horror fiction, and we're bringing our A game. I can't speak for everyone, but I assume that all the other authors are bringing their A game to this beautiful production. Beautiful love letter to Fulci. So go check that out, and that's the book recommendation for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't picked up Clown in the Cornfield in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, if you haven't picked it up, just recently got the American Library Association, or they nominated it for some kind of award, the audiobook version, read by Jesse Valinsky. A wonderful audiobook. The hardcover is beautiful. Put that under the tree. Holidays coming up, or just download the ebook for a little present for yourself. It's a slasher. Uncle Fulci would like that. There's a lot of violence in this. He'd like that too. So yeah, go check that out. I've got other books for you. Subscribe, like, go follow me, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff, and I will see you next week.